Hello, everyone, and happy Wednesday, and welcome to CEO Growth Talks from Chief Outsiders. I'm Slade Kobran, a managing partner here at Chief Outsiders, and I'm very excited about today's Growth Talk. I'm here with my colleagues, Evan Eckman and Dawn Werry, and together we'll be talking about value creation through high-performing marketing and sales. It's a topic that's really important to me as I talk with private equity operating partners and other professionals every day about the challenges that they and their portfolio companies face in building accountable and predictable revenue engines that ultimately lead to differentiated alpha for their investors. Both Dawn and Evan have great experience in supporting these investors and their portfolio company management teams throughout the various stages of the deal cycle from pre-close to exit. In a moment, I'll introduce Dawn and Evan and ask them to share a bit about themselves. But before I do, I'd like to invite everyone who is joining us live today to submit any questions or comments through the chat so that we can keep this as interactive as possible given the format. And if you're viewing a recording of this session, please feel free to reach out to Dawn, Evan, or myself with any questions or comments directly. With that, why don't we get started? Again, very excited to have Dawn and Evan here with me today. Thank you both for spending the time to join me. Evan, if you don't mind, why don't you just take a moment and introduce yourself?
Oh, thanks, Slade. It's great to be here. As you can see right there on the screen, my name is Evan Eckman. I'm a partner and CMO with Chief Outsiders. I've been with Chief Outsiders coming up to 8 years now. I mostly work in the consumer product space, but also from time to time do work in the B2B space. I'm based in Wilmington, North Carolina, where it's a very sunny and beautiful day. Great to be here.
Great. Thank you. And Dawn?
So hi, it's good to be here. I'm Dawn Werry. I also am a partner in CMO, and like Evan, I've been here coming on 8 years. I think I got a month on you, Evan. And I, unlike Evan, tend to focus on the B2B side of the house, so on industrial or real estate markets, in particular, all around the sales funnel and trying to transform marketing. I'm sure Evan will jump in. I did a quick math, I think about 9 portcos that I've worked with as a Chief Outsider. I don't know if you have your number handy, Evan.
It's probably in that range, I would say.
Great. Well, thank you both again, and really excited about the conversation. So when we think about how we work with private equity investors and their management teams, we think about, at least at Chief Outsiders, around the different deal stages from pre-deal due diligence to early post-acquisition, kind of the mid-investment cycle, and then preparing for exit. I'm wondering, Dawn, if you have a good example of maybe some of the work that you've done early on in that deal stage from diligence or right after the close that you can share how you've engaged.
Yeah, so I've got a couple of them. I'll go with what is most common for me. Mostly I come in right after an acquisition, and that'll end up going through almost pre-exit. So typically what I've seen, and I'll give an example in a minute, is a company that's been acquired. They've changed up often the CEO. They know they've got potential. They wouldn't have bought them otherwise, but they recognize that they don't have the consistent, typically sales and marketing or commercial platforms and processes to actually realize that investment thesis. So great example, I've worked with a company for a number of years. I came in, they do power equipment. I came in about a month after their new CEO. They were making a lot of change. They had 80 plus ideas of where they could go in the market. So they needed someone to take a peek at those, decide where are the right places to invest and to try to drive growth. We did that, came up with a 3 to 5 year strategy, also came up with their M&A plan of what they would try to acquire over the next few years. Fast forward 4 years later, they've been following that plan and have more than realized their growth thesis and investment strategy.
Great. A great example. And it brings up something to mind for me, because you mentioned you're starting right after the new CEO started. It's a new relationship with the investor and the management team. How are you engaging both of those audiences, and helping them, maybe with alignment and making sure they're pursuing the right avenues.
So I can jump in. I'm sure, Evan, you probably will jump in as well. For me, it really depends on the relationship between the private equity and the portfolio company. So in this case, for instance, they've got a very close relationship. So I tend to be acting more as a senior advisor at the board meetings rather than every day interacting. I've had some where there's not as strong a relationship, and I can talk about those as well if you'd like, where I'm talking every week or even acting as eyes and ears on the ground, but always with the portfolio company CEO knowing what I'm talking about, never kind of behind their back. That's very important. You don't want to not have that trust. But typically speaking, I'm acting just as a C-level part of the CEO's team and interacting with PE firm the same way they would.
Great. And Evan, what have you seen early on during an investment cycle?
Well, I can even back it up before a company is acquired in sort of the search process, and I can also frame it with the model that we use in Chief Outsiders, which is called Growth Gears, which is what this LinkedIn Live is somewhat built on. There was a great book written some time ago by our founders at Chief Outsiders, Art and Pete. And Growth Gears is broken up into 3 phases: an insights phase, a strategy phase, and finally an execution phase. So whether it's before a company has been purchased or shortly thereafter, generally I focus on the insights phase. And in that area, one of the tools that I often use is to do a comprehensive market assessment with research to bring the management team and the investors really in alignment around what's happening in the marketplace in a quantified way and a qualified way. There are great tools out there in terms of understanding the qualified attitudes, let's say, about a given industry and companies and competitors in that industry. That's a voice of the customer exercise we often go through. There are also quantitative tools that we use that can be research surveys that we do of users of these products, whether they be on the B2B side or the B2C side. And you really get an understanding from that, the marketplace as it is, and the company that has been acquired or is being researched to be acquired, how it fits into that industry. Often I'll even look at some early ideas in terms of pivots or refinements to the strategy and test those concepts right from the beginning to get an early read. If we were to move in this direction or move into that direction, would we have receptivity by consumers, by customers in that space? And often at that point, it brings really the leadership team in alignment as what the best path forward is. And, we move then into the strategy phase after that.
Hey, Slade, can I just add something to what Evan said? There's even a step before sometimes. I know I had an engagement a few years ago where it was the quickest thing, but the company was looking to buy a security company, and a couple of us had experience in that industry. So they brought us in before the acquisition to do due diligence, and literally it was, hey, here's the SIM. Can you guys read through it and let us know what red flags you see? So just being able to tap into the experience we had and not even have to go out and do some insights was valuable work and a quick hit for them.
Yeah, I saw a question pop up on the screen, which we will get to in a moment, but I'd like to just kind of follow this thread for a second. How, because Dawn, you brought up, kind of getting the SIM and having the conversation with the investors pre-deal, and Evan, you did as well. How much are you tending to help find maybe some of those gaps or red flags, as Dawn said? And how is that different than maybe some of the other diligence work that they're getting done on market sizing or voice of the customer work, which often gets done? How are you kind of helping? Because the way I look at it is often, understanding the practical application and the ability of the organization to execute against those strategic plans, value creation plan, and really support the investment thesis. So I'm curious, how do you kind of think about that versus some of the other diligence work that often gets done before Chief Outsiders gets involved? And maybe Dawn, maybe you can start with that.
Yeah, so realistically, I think a lot of the due diligence that I've done has been much more based on, hey, we need a quick assessment from someone who's been there, done that, understands how these things work, than to be really digging into the market. So the due diligence often values what's my market expertise, what's my expertise in judging teams, et cetera, versus once you get in, it's much more about creating the strategy, the execution plan, and the resources to get it moving. So it's really a different mindset and a different sort of part of what we do that we value, much more based on expertise and our ability to really define a very custom market plan for them.
Great. Evan, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, or?
Yeah, I would. I often work in consumer packaged goods, and I can give kind of an example that I think is relevant that could be applied to any industry. Within the consumer packaged goods area, within Chief Outsiders, we have about 30 people that are CMOs on our team that have worked for all of the major CPG companies across hundreds of different product segments. And so when we come into a due diligence process like this, there's a range of experience that simply doesn't typically reside within the PE firm. And that can be historical information. It can be business cycle information that is probably not visible in research, let's say. So we bring those, call it soft skills of that process based on that broad scope of experience that I think is unique. The other thing that really can be, I think, an add-on that we can bring and bring to these discussions is, where are we in the business cycle? Right now, we're at a time where we're sort of mid way through a economic restructuring, let's call it, and we're looking ahead in the next half of this year and into next year, and we see some dynamics that are happening. We have such a broad team of people with experience. They often can look back in history and see in this industry, or maybe within this industry, even a subset of services or products within that industry, how did they behave in the last business cycle when we saw these same types of dynamics? And that's purely experience. That's our value add, but often comes into play. And I've been involved in M&A projects where there is a, call it consolidation phase, where there might be 30 players because the market's hot. But I know from experience that eventually that's going to consolidate down to 7, down to 5. Where are we in that process? And if the investment is looking at the front end, where it's sort of a very chaotic period of time where things have not yet finally gelled into where the mature state of that category it is headed, we can give them that kind of horizon gazing view of where this is likely to go and where their investment can go to win in that consolidation process. Again, that comes from our experience.
Great. We've gotten some good questions here, and Frank, if you don't mind, I know you've got your question up, so let me just address that quickly, if that's okay. I think it's really important for a CFO to consistently build relationships with banks for funding, and obviously, if you're in a private equity or investor-led scenario, your investor will be a great partner with you in developing those relationships, making sure that you are on track, obviously with any covenants or anything else, and helping you build new relationships as well, because that's exactly where their expertise lies. So I think it's really critical to do that. So thank you for that question. A couple of other questions that have come in. Since we were talking about voice of the customer a moment ago, maybe you can share some of the tools that you've leveraged and that you use, and maybe that you've seen some of your Chief Outsiders colleagues use, because I know we are always sharing those resources and tools amongst ourselves. So Dawn, why don't you take that one?
So I'm a pretty traditional person on that. I use a couple of tools. The biggest one is me. I love an in-depth interview. I like to talk to customers, but I also like to talk to former customers, potential customers, partners that they're working with, etc. I find that really gets me in depth in understanding what their value prop is and what they're really bringing. Aside from that, I do use SurveyMonkey or something sometimes for surveys, and purchase research reports help a lot with market sizing. So, Evan, what do you think?
Well, I can build on that. There are great advantages to being your own voice of the customer researcher. I always start there. But there are some great outside resources as well. Very often, we're working with GLG, Coleman Research, and GuidePoint. And I would extend not only voice of the customer, but we would add to that, voice of the consumer, the end consumer, and also voice in the consumer products area. One of the interesting areas that I often work to do on the early stages is interviews with the purchasing managers or the retail buyers of these products, and find out what their views are on the industry, what the various offerings are. And often we can use those same resources to get an insight into our competitors. And what's great working with GuidePoint, GLG, or Coleman Research, they manage all the compliance issues, so we don't have any concerns working in that regard.
Yeah,
great.
And Evan, can I add one more? Investor relations reports. So if you've got a big company that's in the space, they've probably got investor relations. Go look at their reports, whether that's a competitor or something along those lines. That'll give you a lot of great information about the market.
Great, thank you. And I don't know, there wasn't a name associated with that question other than LinkedIn user, but whoever that is, if you'd like to learn more and get some other recommendations, please feel free to reach out to any of us, and we're happy to. Probably more based on any specifics you can share of what information you're trying to gather, guide you as well. Another great question, I'm not sure who to attribute it to since it just says a LinkedIn user, but when you come into a new situation in a PE-backed business, what are some of the first questions you ask, and what do you want to know? And I might just modify that a little bit if it's okay, and say, what do you want to know from the investor, and what do you want to know from the management team? So, Evan, why don't you start with that one?
Well, what brought you here is probably the first question. What was motivating this investment, and how does that fit into your portfolio? One of the PE firms that I worked with, they said, hey, every year we are charged to make a sizable investment in the United States. And this is the money that we're given. And so we have a fixed investment amount. And, you're kind of in the virtual Shark Tank. And I like to hear what are they looking for, and what's their their exit cycle, their hold time, and what do they aspire from all of this. So that's the first thing that I look for. And often I look at it as Slade, you and I and Don were talking about recently. I've lived in a lot of different cities, and often buy a house. When I was relocated for different corporate jobs, and very often you can look at these types of investments that have typically a 3 to 5 year window. If you look at it and use the metaphor of a house that you're only going to live in for 3 to 5 years, you make different investment choices. And sometimes you buy emotionally a house, but you're wiser to buy practically. And sometimes you find that they have purchased a company more on emotion than practicality. But you make wise investment choices. And extending that metaphor, if you're going to own a house for 3 years, is a good time to build a pool in the backyard. Maybe, but probably not. To finish the basement, maybe, but probably not. So then you really look at it and say, what can we do in this investment time frame to maximize that valuation? And we start working through what that might look like.
Yeah, I really like that approach. One of the things that really has stayed with me in talking to an operating partner once, he said, our job is to transform the business from the asset we bought to the asset we're going to sell. Mm-hmm. And so thinking through, well, what does that transformation look like? What are their expectations? Really helps, I think, guide those decisions and helps you as growth leaders really lean into the things that are going to support that transformation. I know that may be different than someone who was looking to, keep and manage and run a business for 20 years might be looking at. Dawn, maybe take the flip side of that. What do you want to know from the management team when you start?
So the biggest things I want to know from them, what are their goals? What concerns them about those goals? And do they have the right people, processes, and systems in place? Where do they think there are the biggest gaps to tackle? It's not that we're not going to go find other things that are either concerns or aren't, but at least knowing where their mindset and what's most concerning, because we're really a partner for them, right? So I want to help them get over those things that they already know are concerns.
Right. And Dawn, you brought up something interesting before. In most cases, whether it's private equity sponsored or founder family led or whatever the case might be, we are acting as part of their leadership team in a fractional or interim role through sales and marketing. And so I kind of think of it as a dual role, right? Because you've got to help them on a day-to-day basis as well as help through that transformation of the business asset. So maybe you could talk a little bit more about how do you lean in on those day-to-day activities to drive revenue and kind of scale up that business platform?
Yeah, well, I think there are a couple of different ways, and I'll use an example. Again, I talked about a company that we had come in early on, came up with their 3 to 5 year strategy. They've been driving that. They're about 4 years in at this point. And we've been back multiple times to pick up special projects for them. So we started out in a very strategic, get the strategy set up, get the plan set up, make sure their resources were there, have the milestones, dashboards, plans, all that type of thing. But now as they've been implementing it and they haven't needed us at the same level and as their C-suite, and they brought somebody in to be their VP of commercial, instead, what we've been able to do is transition a little bit and do special projects. And that goes anything from, hey, we need a customer list or a sales assessment, to we actually have one of my colleagues who's a general manager for one of their acquisitions that they brought in to try to help that get up to speed. So it's a lot about being flexible to say, what are the other projects that you need a quick hitter to come in on while they now are equipped and driving the strategy.
Great. And Evan, I think of a scenario that I see a lot is, great organization, great people have built a nice business, but they haven't really spent a lot of time building a strategy and a plan. They've just kind of gone out and made it work. And they've now gotten to the point where they have an investor and, they're looking to go, the investor's looking to take them, say, from 50 million to 150 million during their hold, and through a combination of organic and add-on M&A. So scale is an issue for many of these companies. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how you help them manage and scale the business and at what pace, because I know speed is really of the essence in these scenarios.
Sure. I think we come back to that point of we're there helping move from that insights phase in the growth gears to the strategy phase. So perhaps that $50 million team has done a great job getting to where they are, but they don't know how to chart the course to that next plateau of 100 or $150 million. So where we come in is we devise that strategy and the stepping stones to get there, the investment stepping stones, but also the strategy behind those investments. And then, unlike most business consulting firms, we typically stay on with that management organization and team, and we lead in that implementation. And where our value add is really unique is we're in the market every single day. We're not academics at the 50,000 foot level. We're at ground level implementing. So at any given time, if I'm doing CPG work, I'm doing CPG work today, meaning this morning and this afternoon with clients, fighting the good fight. So I'm there. But I also have, 130 colleagues within our firm that are fighting the good fight as well. And so in some cases, we're bringing to bear third-party teams that can be, for example, in the marketing area, it's agencies that are supporting these implementations. But the value add is we're working with hundreds of different agencies at any given time, and we really know the best ones, whether it's a research agency or an advertising agency or whatever. We're in the trenches every single day, and we know those that can really deliver in that speed time frame that's necessary. And also, to that point, there may be need for other resources that have experiences that the existing team does not. And in some cases, we see opportunity to go into new channels, new markets, and we work collaboratively with those leadership team people to find the right people to help them get to their next plateau. And that is, in one case, a relatively new service we're offering, which is chief sales officers to be the sales plan developers and implementers of those marketing-led visions.
Great. And Dawn, I know, an important aspect of that transformation and then, really realizing the value of the investment from a private equity standpoint is having a company that has built the scale and the programs and the processes into the business, much less work for whatever the next buyer or investor might need to do, and they can really realize that value. How do you think about helping the business to scale? Maybe you can share an example.
So I think about making sure that they don't just have the strategy, but the people, processes, and systems. So a great example, I came in to work with a company in the industrial services space. They had grown the idea of where what got you here won't get you there. They had grown through their relationships, and so all of their business was nearby. They didn't really have a scalable process for sales and marketing. So we came in, we built the sales team from scratch. We built the sales playbook, the processes, et cetera, because they recognized they were never going to get out of their local market and never going to be able to be bringing in new logos if they didn't have a sales and marketing engine. So that was actually as much a focus, if not more, than on getting them the go-to-market strategy, is making sure they had the team and the processes and even the Salesforce CRM in place to drive it for the long term.
Great. So we've been talking a lot. We talked about the pre-deal. We're talking about during the hold. What about when things are starting to wrap up? The investors are starting to think about, kind of that transaction. They're approaching that point. How do you lean into that? And maybe you can talk a little bit at what stage you get involved. Is it a year out typically? Is it 6 months out? And how do you kind of help frame the story and the approach for the next transaction. I don't think I articulated that the best, but hopefully that's what I was going for.
Evan, do you want to grab that one, or do you?
Yeah, I can jump in there. One of the things that I really enjoy doing at this stage is working as a contributor, and I would say as an editor to the pitch book process. One of the things that we're really good at, because we do a lot of work in private equity through this very cycle that is up on our screen here, is at that end of the process, extending from the metaphor, let's say, of buying and selling a house. I always like to write the write-up brochure on selling a house, and I like to write up the brochure for selling a company as well. And obviously, there's a lot of parties involved in that, but we have a marketer's eye on how to sell the value of that company, maybe in a different way than more traditional ways. And going through that process a few times, it seems to have led to a higher valuation, in my view, anyway. And so we've seen success from being a part of that process as well.
Great. I'm wondering, one of the dynamics I've seen is, management team that is often going to be engaged through different ownership cycles is thinking of doing things or wants to invest in certain areas that are going to be moving beyond any particular ownership period. So how do you kind of balance that? So I think, for an example, I had a portfolio company CEO want to talk to us, and they had a big strategic initiative they wanted to do internally on launching a new product. The investor was interested in that, but it wasn't anything that they were going to realize during their hold period. So how do you balance kind of doing enough to show the promise as part of the team, and not so much that the investor is not going to see the return? And how much do you build that into the story? Dawn, why don't you take that one? I know I stumped you.
It could be either one of us. I think of it a couple ways. I mean, you really did mention it. It's looking at every single initiative and being able to say, what is the value that's adding in the next X number of months? And if you're at the end and sort of pre-exit, you're probably talking in the next year. Is it going to add enough value? Or does it help with, for instance, a multiple for the private equity company or something like that? So having a few criteria around, is it going to help this year? Is it going to help improve the multiple? Or is it going to set us up for a market that makes that story that Evan's writing even stronger? If it's one of those three things, it's probably worth doing. Not having that hard conversation with the CEO to say there are probably higher priorities that we should be addressing instead.
Right. Yeah, one thing I've done in those pitch books is, when I get into a later phase of the hold period, I make sure that we really have a full pipeline of innovation, and that pipeline of innovation goes beyond the 1 or 2 years, but it's a 3 to 5 year ideally view on innovation, and it may not be in the business plan that's part of the pitch book, but it's upside. So somebody looking at that pitch book says, well, I see the framework of their business plan and understand the justification for their valuation. But what I also see for all of the hedges that might be headwinds in this, there are some tailwinds, and I can see that their innovation pipeline is very full, headed in a direction that's very exciting. And we're buying a future with something like that. And ideally, if you can get some of those ideas in the marketplace, even though they may not have reached full scale launch, and see some early indications that these ideas have legs, that they're really going somewhere, but haven't had, let's say, the full investment to launch them to full scale. That can be another way to bolster evaluation and point to the future as an attractive element of the full package.
Great. Well, first of all, I want to thank you both again for taking the time, and for everyone who's been listening in. Encourage you to keep those questions, comments coming. Certainly post this. Feel free to reach out to Evan, Dawn, or myself with any of those comments. Before we go, just for folks who may not be as familiar with Chief Outsiders, we really focus on building engines of growth, scalable, predictable, actionable, high-performing revenue engines at scale. And that's really across, all the different investment cycles we talked about. We do that by bringing experienced sales and marketing executives to the table, folks who have done this multiple times, who are strategic in thinking and very action-oriented in execution. We're the on-demand resource able to engage quickly, really professionalize and scale the business and the commercial operations, and then disengage without a long-term burden on the organization. And, often we're hiring our replacement, so to speak. Really provide a fresh and unbiased perspective that middle market and other businesses can't attract, and quite frankly, don't always need on an ongoing basis. And we have a tribe of experienced growth executives who work together, collaborate, learn from each other, and bring that expertise to bear for every one of our clients across our tribe. So again, feel free, anyone, to reach out to us. Happy to answer any additional questions. Obviously, more than willing to talk about any individual scenarios and where we might be able to help. And please keep that dialogue coming. And Evan and Dawn, again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Slade.